So all these factors going on at the same time led to a society that was faced with a number of difficult issues. How can we effectively place adults in appropriate vocations? It was a period, the period of the largest growth in terms of immigrants in the U.S. history, and basically adding to the tremendous growth in the population, and how we're going to effectively distribute immigrants across vocational options. How are we going to help people move from school to work? So we had a lot of people finishing school and not effectively moving into careers. What is the appropriate way to educate children in this new society? What is the best method for educating people for eventual work? How can we reduce unnecessary job shifts by workers? And how can we reduce workers' dissatisfaction? And generally, there was a need for professionals who could help people deal with these vocationally related choices. So, in this period, when we were faced with, again, sort of new questions, issues that we hadn't dealt with before, based on the way that things were changing in this country, a few of these factors led to the eventual development of the counseling profession. The first one is government funding. So the U.S. government, through a number of processes, including supporting counselor education, supporting the profession of rehabilitation counseling through legislation that was enacted. That's one part of the sort of puzzle. The other part we're going to talk about is the rise of vocational education, and then the impact of war. And what you'll find in your career, and looking at the history of rehabilitation and the present as well, is that war has always had a significant impact on the profession of rehabilitation counseling. It is doing so currently, and probably will continue to do so. We'll talk about that influence too. We'll start with this idea of what was happening during World War I. And basically, it's this issue of testing again. Okay, the Army was using psychologists to classify men using intelligence testing, aptitude testing, personality testing, and basically the purpose was to help the Army decide where people would be most effective, who would best serve as an officer, who would best serve in the infantry, and so on. And the people who are working in vocational guidance, vocational education, realized that this use of testing could become a very important part of the work that they were doing, and did become a very important part of the counseling specialty. The other consequence, a result of World War I, was that there were many veterans living with disabilities in the years during and after World War I. So the government was faced with a large population of veterans with disabilities who weren't working. And one of the responses to that was the Soldiers Rehabilitation Act. So federal legislation in 1918 that developed what would basically become the first Rehab Act, and this was the Rehab Act for soldiers. The legislation provided for veterans of U.S. wars who had always been compensated in the past in the form of pensions, but this bill developed vocational rehabilitation programs and vocational training for veterans. It did limit this training to people who would likely have an employment outcome. So employment had to be a feasible possibility in order for people to be eligible. And what the government did was made federal money available to states. So they said, we will give the states money to develop these vocational education programs for veterans, but also to provide vocational training to youth and dislocated workers. And then 2 years later, in 1920, the Civilian Rehab Act, the Smith-Fess Act, which we recognize as really the birth date of the rehabilitation counseling profession. The Smith-Fess Act in 1920, and this was essentially the Rehab Act for civilians, not veterans, but the rest of the population, people with a specific form of disability. Right? This act was specifically for people with physical disabilities, defined as a physical defect or infirmary in the language of the act. But obviously that leaves out a lot of other sorts of disabilities and conditions, and over time we came to include those. But in the original act, this was for people with physical disabilities, and the government provided states with a 50-50 match. So in other words, they said, we will give you this much money if you come up with the same amount, and we'll put your half and our half together to form these state-based programs of vocational guidance, education, placement, and occupational adjustment. And essentially what happened was a lot of states thought this was a good deal. There was a strong incentive for states to develop these programs. Some of them had already started to develop these programs. It had done so before 1920, but after the act, within a year and a half, 34 states had developed programs. And as you know from or will know if you haven't had it yet, from the principles course, the Rehab Act was eventually strengthened and continued through the 30s and 40s, 50s and so on, with some modifications over time. And we'll come back to that in just a second. We'll talk about something that happened in the interim, though, which was World War II. Another significant impact on the development of the rehab counseling profession. And the things that happened during World War II included, as always happens in times of war, is you tend to see great progress in physical rehabilitation, medical rehabilitation, and medical advances and psychological treatment advances during periods of war, and that certainly was occurring in World War II. We also in the U.S. had a significant labor shortage, and we realized that people with disabilities and women who hadn't been a part of the workforce prior to World War II could be and became productive and important parts of the U.S. workforce, and really changed the nature of the workforce in America from that time on. New medications and medical advances increased the chances of surviving a war, surviving the injuries sustained in war, but living with a disability. So again, as was the case in World War I, large groups of veterans with disabilities who would be returning and seeking employment, and who would benefit from rehabilitation counseling. So in that period after World War II, in the 1940s and through the 1960s, the government began to respond to these issues with the federal funding of counselor education programs, with an emphasis on vocational guidance and mental health. And one of the pieces of legislation that did this was the 1954 Rehab Act amendments, in which the federal government made money available to colleges and universities to develop programs to educate rehabilitation counselors and other forms of counselors to do this work. And that act, the 1954 Rehab Act, was really the beginning of rehab counselor education as we know it today at the master's level. Okay, I'm going to drop back in time now and come at this question of our history from the other perspective I mentioned, which is the rise of vocational education. And we're going to go back through the century and come back to the present from this perspective, things that were going on at the same time. So we're back in the 1870s for a minute, and in New York and Massachusetts, again dealing with these issues of the changing society, a lot of people looking for work. These states developed laws requiring vocational education, and schools in the Northeast began to expand their curriculum to include vocational education, vocational training. And over the next few decades, this increased, and basically the purpose was to help people who were the purpose of this and of the people who were doing this work, the people who were entering the field of vocational guidance or vocational counseling, was to help people who were coming out of school to identify appropriate career goals and vocations and gain skills they needed to enter or re-enter the labor market. So there was a group of professionals who were specializing in this vocational education around the Northeast, and basically what happened is they began to find each other and communicate with each other, and eventually organize into professional societies. And Frank Sneddon in Massachusetts decided in 1911 that we should get together and have a national conference of vocational educators. And they did that, and they had their conference in 1911, and they had so much fun that they did it again in 1912 and in 1913, and in the 1913 conference they formed a national association which was called the National Vocational Guidance Association. And you're going to see that what this became was eventually the American Counseling Association that we know today. But it went through some changes in the meantime. It grew from the National Vocational Guidance Association in 1913. It eventually collaborated in the 50s and joined up with several other associations and organizations that were doing related work, teacher education, college personnel association, counselor trainers, and these organizations joined together in 1952 to form the Professional Guidance Association, or PGA. And apparently the real reason that they changed that to the American PGA in the following year, in 1953, is because it sounded too much like the PGA that we associate with golf. So they changed the name to the APGA in 1953. Important to understand that one of the first divisions of the APGA was the American Rehab Counseling Association. It's important to understand that rehabilitation counseling was and has been sort of part of the counseling profession at every step of the way from its early development. So ARCA was one of the first divisions in APGA. It was established in 1957. In 1957, the National Rehabilitation Counseling Association was also developed, and that was developed within the National Rehabilitation Association, which the NRA, the National Rehabilitation Association, NRA, have been around since the early 1920s. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. But the rehab counseling training model, that model, remember we talked about how the government started to fund counselor training, but a lot of the training that was done in the rehabilitation counseling area became a model for training counselors in the other government trained programs of the time. this national professional counseling body continued to grow and develop, and the APGA became the American Association for Counseling and Development in 1983, and in 1992 became the ACA, American Counseling Association, as we know it today. And ARCA, still a division of the ACA. So at what point then, after looking at these sort of trends of these paths of development, at what point does a field become a profession? Is rehabilitation counseling a profession? And if so, why? What makes it so? One set of requirements that's been proposed in terms of what is a profession is this list here. And I'm going to go through it one at a time and talk about how rehab counseling became a profession in terms of the context of these criteria. So the first is the creation of a full-time occupation. And we, as I said, we associate our beginning with the Smith-Vest Act and the development of a full-time occupation to do rehabilitation counseling beginning in the 1920s. The establishment of training schools is the second criteria, and we talked about the training programs developing in the 50s and growing until today. The third criteria is the formation of professional organizations, which began really in the 20s with the National Rehabilitation Association, for example. Also in the 50s with the association with what would become the ACA, and ongoing today. And today there are many professional organizations associated with rehabilitation counseling. Other criteria is the formation of a code of ethics, and we will be talking a little bit about ethics in a little bit, but we developed our first code of ethics in 1972, and it has been revised 1, 2, 3 times since then, including most recently this year. So that criteria has been met for a few decades now. Political agitation to protect the job territory of the profession, and that's dealing with issues like certification and licensure and other professional issues, and also identifying our scope of practice. And what is it that we do that is different from other counseling professionals and other professions doing similar work? And that has been going on and is ongoing and will be ongoing. And then the last one is further definition of the area of competence, also ongoing, also an area that we've paid a lot of attention to in this field, looking at our roles and functions and thinking about what is it that we do and what is it that students who are learning and trying to become professional rehabilitation counselors, what is it that they need to know? Here I want to talk about an issue that first came up in that period of the 50s and 60s when we were receiving federal money to develop these training programs. So the debate that has been identified as the big hat or two hats approach. And basically the question was, what is the proper training and professional scope of the rehabilitation counselor? And the big hat, two hats question refers to the two ideas. One is that counselors would be trained in two different areas, and basically there would be professionals, rehabilitation professionals who did case management and maybe assessment and job placement and those sorts of parts of the job, and then there would be other professionals who were trained as counselors to do mental health counseling, adjustment counseling, and really specialize in the counseling part of our work. The big hat approach would be that basically rehabilitation counselors would be trained in all of that. We would be trained as professional counselors. We would be trained to do a variety of different sorts of counseling, and in addition we would be trained to do case management, assessment, understand legal and medical and psychosocial aspects of disability, and the many things that we do. And that is basically the approach that we took. This is a statement which I think highlights that basically our dual approach, but emphasizes the counseling aspect of our work, and this comes from the standards of practice, which I'll talk about in just a second. But it talks about the counseling treatment part of our work, the counseling treatment intervention, which is the application of cognitive, affective, behavioral, and systemic counseling strategies, which include developmental wellness, pathologic, and multicultural principles of human behavior. And these interventions are implemented in the context of a professional counseling relationship, may include, but are not limited to, well, a lot of things, but I just want to point out a couple. Individual, group, marriage, and family counseling and psychotherapy. Okay, part of what we do, part of our scope. The diagnostic description and treatment of persons with mental, emotional, and behavioral disorders or disabilities. Guidance, consulting to facilitate growth and development, including educational development, career development, career counseling and adjustment, adaptation issues, referrals, consulting, and research. And I show you this sort of wordy definition to point out the approach that we took, and what I think really makes rehabilitation counseling a unique profession, is that we are trained as professional counselors. We are trained to do therapy and counseling sort of proper, the way people think of counseling in a variety of settings. But we were also trained in a number of other areas relating to disability and living with the disability and working with the disability and the process of rehabilitation. So I mentioned the standards of practice. Just want to point out the standards of practice for rehabilitation counselors includes two documents, the scope of practice statement and the code of ethics. And both of these documents are available on the website of the CRCC, which is at crcccertification.com. And I have that on the slide here. But it's basically two documents. We're going to talk about the ethical perspective in the context of this course and theories and techniques. But this is a little bit more from our scope of practice statement. So the statement that says what it is that we do, and I didn't include the whole thing, but basically the first part that says rehabilitation counseling is a systematic process in which we assist people with physical, mental, developmental, cognitive, and emotional disabilities to achieve their personal, career, and independent living goals in the most integrated setting possible, through the application of the counseling process. Counseling process involves communication, goal setting, beneficial growth or change, through self-advocacy, psychological, vocational, social, and behavioral interventions. Okay? So how do we do all this? What is the context in which we work? That is really the focus of this semester. What are these interventions? Why do we work in the areas we work in, and how do we do it effectively? This is really where theory comes in. I said this is from the scope of practice. It's available at crccertification.com, as is the code of ethics. I'm going to finish with one point on the idea of a scope of practice, and I encourage you to go and review carefully that document. As I said, what the scope of practice is a statement about what it is that we do, our professional scope, and it is differentiated from the individual scope of practice. Okay, and this is an important idea. So the scope of practice is basically a statement that says what rehabilitation counselors have been trained to do. All the things that you are learning about in this rehabilitation counseling graduate program are based on this scope of practice statement. But I want to make a distinction between the professional scope and your individual scope of practice, which may overlap, which may be entirely the same, but which may be different. So your individual scope of practice is based on your own knowledge of the abilities and skills that have been gained through a program of education and professional experience, and you are ethically bound to limit your practice to that individual scope of practice. And the idea here is, if your training in rehabilitation counseling is the training you've received through your graduate program in rehabilitation counseling, then your scope of practice is the professional scope of practice. But let's say that you go out and you receive some training in a counseling technique or an intervention that you didn't learn about in your graduate program in rehabilitation counseling. So let's say you go out and learn some intervention in which you use hypnosis. Okay, you wouldn't learn about hypnosis in this program and how to use it. You wouldn't be trained and skilled as a result of your graduating from this program. But if you did go and get your own education and experience and you became a certified hypnotic therapist, let's say, then that would become part of your individual scope of practice. In other words, you could practice that in that area that you have become certified and educated and skilled in, to the extent that is approved. You can practice that even though that is outside the professional scope of practice for rehabilitation counselors. But essentially the idea is that it is ethical practice to work within your scope, and the scope of practice statement tells us what we can do, what we are qualified to do, and it limits, it's a very broad scope, but it is a scope that is limited. So in other words, there are some things that we are not trained to do, and ethical practice requires that we do not work outside of our scope of practice. So summing up this part of our discussion so far, 3 key points. First of all, I want to highlight that rehabilitation counseling developed with the counseling profession, alongside and at the same time, as a needed and critically important specialty of counseling. That number 2, rehabilitation counseling professionals are required to have a broad range of knowledge and skill. That we learn a lot of things, and we are capable of doing a lot of things in order to effectively assist persons with disabilities to achieve their career and personal goals. And the third summary point is that this process requires that we have a theoretical framework for understanding and working with our clients, for understanding